LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the October 15th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 14 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. There was no Real Time with Bill Maher this week, so my one source of political comedy this week will be Saturday Night Live from last night, and I have a couple parts of the cold open with Alec Baldwin impersonating Donald Trump in a couple ways that I thought was really effective for the topic that I'm covering. The main topic is Trump unraveling, which is actually kind of a double entendre because there's this Gabriel Sherman article in Vanity Fair. Gabriel Sherman is the author of this book here, The Loudest Voice in the Room, about Fox News and Roger Ailes. Well, he's a good reporter about a lot of different things. He works for Vanity Fair now, and he has this report talking to a bunch of different White House sources saying that Trump is unraveling. Here you can see. And I've actually put a link to that Vanity Fair article. So that's the one way Trump is unraveling. But the other way he's unraveling, he's actually unraveling accomplishments of the Obama administration. A couple big ones, Iran and Obamacare. Trump used executive orders this week to unravel those, and those will be my two subtopics I get to. But I'm going to start with the Saturday Night Live clip, and I've edited two parts of the Alec Baldwin impersonation of Donald Trump, two clips together that show these two different kinds of unraveling that Donald Trump is undergoing, supposedly, and I'll talk about that a little more with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Been a big week, folks. We're getting rid of everything Obama did. Healthcare, the Iran deal, and we're ripping out all the vegetables in Michelle Obama's garden and planting McNuggets. McNuggets. Love the McNuggets. Because we love America, don't we? And also, how dumb is that Rex Tillerson, folks? I mean, really, what a dumb-a-rooney. And he has the nerve to call me a moron. Talk about the pot calling the kettle Mexican. I am so much smarter than this guy, Rex. I have a huge IQ. I took an IQ test, and let me just assure you, it came back positive, very positive. Okay? My IQ is through the roof, and frankly, through many of the clouds as well, okay? And by the way, I'm the only guy who even knows what IQ means. Most people don't even know what it stands for. Incredible. A lot of people don't know that.
Well, I've never thought that Alec Baldwin's impersonation of Donald Trump is incredible, but I mean, because it's more of a caricature than an impersonation, but it has its humorous aspects, and I thought the writing was really good, especially for those parts of the cold open. There was actually this Kellyanne Conway parody or impersonation by Kate McKinnon having to do with like the Stephen King It movie. It didn't really fit into my topics, but I put a link down in the video description as usual to the source of all my clips, including that Saturday Night Live clip, is available free on YouTube from the Saturday Night Live channel, where that Kate McKinnon Stephen King's It parody with Kellyanne Conway and Hillary Clinton, that's really worth watching too. Also down in the video description you'll see a link to my clip list if you want to follow along, the 14 clips and one still image. I just already showed you the still image from the Vanity Fair article. But I now want to get to the actual news clips, and I have from four of the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CNN, CBS, and Fox News. Those are the big five corporate outlets I take my clips from. Four of those I'm going to contrast. First, NBC and Fox News, the way they cover the unraveling of Obama administration accomplishments and the throwing the real responsibility over to Congress. As you might expect, NBC covers that much more critically than Fox News does. And then I'm going to compare the way that ABC and CNN cover the Iran versus Obamacare unraveling. So those are the next four clips. They're all news summaries from four of the big five corporate outlets. I skipped CBS because I try to minimize my CBS clips for reasons I don't want to go into, having to do with copyright. But anyway, here is the NBC Meet the Press clip. Chuck Todd talking about how it looks like Donald Trump is unraveling Obama administration accomplishments, but really it's kind of a head fake in a way that I will talk about with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Watch President Trump go after President Obama's signature domestic and foreign policy achievements this week, Obamacare and the Iran nuclear deal, and conclude that he was simply working to undo the Obama presidency. But it was also possible to conclude that Mr. Trump was eager to look as if he's doing something while punting the final decisions to Congress. Here's the president talking to reporters on Friday about the proposed cuts to the poor on subsidies on Obamacare.
Now, if the Democrats were smart, what they do is come and negotiate something. What would be nice if the Democratic leaders could come over to the White House, the Democrats should come to me, I would even go to them.
And here's the president on Iran.
We will see what happens with Iran. We're very unhappy with Iran because we'll see what happens over the next short period of time, but we'll see what happens.
Of course, complicating matters for Mr. Trump is the chaos that consistently surrounds his administration. The president engaged in a Twitter battle with Senator Bob Corker, the chairman of the committee responsible for any reworking of the Iran deal. He lashed out at Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, actually, even questioning his IQ, perhaps. And when Tom Price resigned as head of HHS, it left no cabinet secretary to implement the changes the president wants to make to the Affordable Care Act. All this while President Trump is promising to make sweeping changes here and overseas.
It's become a familiar tactic.
We'll have Congress take a look at it. Congress has already begun the work. Hopefully Congress will come through.
President Trump pledged to follow through on his campaign promise to dismantle President Obama's signature domestic and foreign policy achievements.
We are going to have great health care. We're very unhappy with Iran.
Then pass the buck to a Congress controlled by his own party, which has been unable to pass significant legislation, challenging lawmakers to either constrain him or to help him achieve the goals in a more realistic way. On health care, the president ended government payments to insurance companies that subsidize premiums for about 6 million lower-income Americans on the Obamacare exchanges. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says this move could raise premiums by 20% next year and leave 1 million more Americans without insurance.
That money is going to insurance companies to prop up insurance companies. That money is going to insurance companies to lift up their stock price.
The president is already facing pushback from some Republicans.
Low-income people are going to have a very difficult time, in fact, for some it may be impossible, affording their deductibles and their co-pays.
The cost-sharing reductions, if they're not paid to the insurance companies, premiums will likely increase, and so the insurance companies will get their money either way.
And in the blame game of who broke health care, Democrats are threatening to make this a campaign issue this year and next.
Obamacare is not perfect. We should try to improve it. But it doesn't mean you take it away and hurt people.
Meanwhile, on Iran, after Mr. Trump was urged by many of his own foreign policy advisors to keep the 2015 nuclear deal in place.
Do you believe it's in our national security interest at the present time to remain in the JCPOA?
Yes, Senator, I do.
Iran is not in material breach of the agreement, and I do believe the agreement to date has delayed the development of a nuclear capability by Iran.
The president announced that he is decertifying the nuclear deal, but not scrapping it for now.
In the event we are not able to reach a solution working with Congress and our allies, then the agreement will be terminated.
The president has kind of rolled the grenade in the room, had it go off without having a strategy as to where we're going.
And joining me now is the...
So, as you might expect, I prefer that analysis from Chuck Todd and NBC, the critical analysis of how Donald Trump is looking like he's unraveling both Obamacare and the Iran deal, but it is actually not exactly what it looks like. He's putting a lot of responsibility over onto Congress so that he can avoid responsibility, possibly, and that is not the way it was spun on Fox News, as you might expect. This is a much shorter clip. This is about 95 seconds. James Rosen is the guest host. James Rosen, you may remember, for my longtime viewers, I have a Fox News obituary of Kurt Vonnegut, that kind of Fox News obituary trashes Kurt Vonnegut, I think is the title. It's a very early video of mine. Well, James Rosen was responsible for that, so I've never been a James Rosen fan. I'm only going to take a few clips of him, 2 or 3, I can't remember. Yeah, 3 clips, I think, of James Rosen talking to guests. Here's him. This is actually the introduction where you'll see they set it up as Donald Trump challenging Congress and, and taking on these issues, rolling back Obama and challenging Congress in a way that I think is very different from what you saw from NBC in that last clip, as I will discuss with you after we watch that over here.
Takes aim at Barack Obama's 2 biggest accomplishments. First, the Iran nuclear deal.
In the event we are not able to reach a solution working with Congress and our allies, then the agreement will be terminated.
We'll examine the president's new strategy with National Security Advisor General H.R. McMaster. It's a Fox News Sunday exclusive. Then, a stunning blow to Obamacare as the president orders the federal government to stop paying subsidies for Obamacare exchanges.
That money was a subsidy and almost you could say a payoff to insurance companies.
On all this and more from both sides of the aisle, we get the sense of the U.S. Senate from Democrat Chris Murphy and Republican Dr. Bill Cassidy. Plus,
I'm not quitting today, and I don't think I'm being fired today.
White House Chief of Staff General John Kelly tamping down uncertainty over his standing and defending President Trump's feud with Senator Bob Corker.
When members of Congress say things that are unfair or critical, the president has a right to defend himself.
Our Sunday panel weighs in on Trump versus Corker and which of them will pay the higher price. All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. President Trump's back-to-back moves against his predecessor's health care law and the nuclear agreement with Iran not only seek to undo the Obama legacy, but assign Congress responsibility for choosing the next steps. This hour, the president's national...
So, yeah, I think that gives a very different spin. I mean, I guess it depends maybe on which side of the political divide you're on. I have a lot more distrust of Fox News, not just James Rosen, and I think that, like I said, I much prefer the NBC analysis, but of course I am LiberalViewer, so you can tell me whether you agree or disagree with my analysis of those 2 clips juxtaposed together. And now I'm going to juxtapose 2 other clips together, this from ABC and CNN, also summarizing pretty much the same facts. And what I wanted to show, the juxtaposition between these 2 clips, is the way ABC looks really more carefully at the rollback on Obamacare, while CNN looks more carefully at the rollback of the Iran deal. Neither one is necessarily better, but they have different emphases, and I actually think ABC had the best summary in their news summary of the rollback of Obamacare, and that's the next clip, George Stephanopoulos. It's actually the shortest of, or actually each of these clips get shorter. CNN will be the shortest in just a minute, but here is 85 seconds on the rollback of Obama's legacy, especially Obamacare over here.
Good morning. Candidate Trump's core pitch was pretty simple. If Obama's for it, I'm against it. But 9 months into his presidency, Trump has been stymied by a mix of Congress, the courts, our allies, and our adversaries. So this week he took a page from Obama's playbook. When persuasion doesn't work, take executive action on your own. He moved to kill the EPA Clean Power Plan and decertify the Iran nuclear deal. We're going to talk to the UN Ambassador, Nikki Haley, about that later in the program. First, the president's latest blows to Obamacare. Executive orders that aim to loosen the rules on pre-existing conditions and guaranteed benefits and stop the subsidies to health insurers that help low-income Americans afford their coverage. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that action could cause premiums to jump by 20% in 2018, 25% in 2020. The federal deficit also takes a hit, and more people will lose their coverage. About 7 million Americans benefit directly from those subsidies, and many more will feel the squeeze, a point hammered home by Nevada's Republican governor. It's going to hurt kids, it's going to hurt families, it's going to hurt individuals, it's going to hurt people with mental health issues, it's going to hurt veterans, it's going to hurt everybody. After his 1-2 punch, the president invited Democrats to fix what he's breaking.
If the Democrats should come to me, I would even go to them, because I'm only interested in one thing, getting great health care for this country.
And we're joined now by the top Democrats.
And actually, I don't have any clips of Nancy Pelosi. I decided not to take any of those clips. But I did like the detailed description of the way Trump's attack on the insurance subsidies is going to hurt millions of Americans. And that was not something you saw on Fox News, although I do have a couple clips at the end specifically on the subsidy rollback, and I am going to do a little legal analysis at the end using the Constitution. You'll see Senator Bill Cassidy, the Republican who got in that feud with Jimmy Kimmel about the Jimmy Kimmel test for health care. He says that these Obamacare subsidies are unconstitutional, and I will dispute that, and that's actually the last clip I'm going to show. But I want to get to the one other new summary clip that focuses more on the Iran topic, which I'll have more. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clips on the Iran topic after I finish up these Trump unraveling clips. And I will have this really exciting, well, not exciting, but excruciating would probably be the better word for the Rex Tillerson clip I'm going to show, where he doesn't deny that he called Trump a moron, and then he also addresses this idea that conservative Republican Senator Bob Corker said that he had been castrated by Donald Trump. His Secretary of State had been castrated by Donald Trump, metaphorically, in terms of his power as Secretary of State. But before I get to that clip, that's actually the clip after next. But I do want to show this 1-minute clip of CNN doing Jake Tapper doing State of the Union. The State of the Union is changing course both on Obamacare and Iran, but more of an emphasis on Iran over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is changing course. This week, President Trump moved to undo 2 cornerstone policies of the Obama legacy, Obamacare and the Iran deal. The president disavowing the nuclear deal, saying Iran is not in compliance with the terms of the agreement. But President Trump fell short of terminating the deal altogether, though the president did leave that option on the table.
In the event we are not able to reach a solution working with Congress and our allies, then the agreement will be terminated.
This morning, U.S. allies are speaking out against President Trump's decision. Just hours ago, Great Britain and Germany reiterated they are, quote, firmly committed to the agreement. This follows a strong rebuke from the European Union's foreign policy chief.
It is not a bilateral agreement. It does not belong to any single country, and it is not up to any single country to terminate it.
Here to discuss this and much more is...
And then comes Rex Tillerson, and I am going to show a clip of Rex Tillerson, not so much talking about the Iran deal, although that last clip of the EU foreign minister talking about how even if America leaves the deal, it's not a deal between America and Iran. There are all these other countries, and they're going to try to continue with the deal. And the split between the U.S. and the allies, the European allies of the United States, is something I'm going to focus on when I get to those Iran clips. But I thought that was a good summary of the Iran deal. I don't know why it is that Jake Tapper, after the first 10 seconds, that was a 1-minute clip, and the last 50 seconds were all on Iran after a brief mention of Obamacare. And I don't know, it's hard for me to decide which is more important, or whether it's better to emphasize Obamacare or better to emphasize Iran in terms of the big 2 rollbacks, or the 2 big rollbacks, I should say. Though I think on Meet the Press, they also talked about the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan that was also scrapped. And that also is a big deal, especially if you are worried about climate change. But before I get to the end of the topic of Trump unraveling, I want to get to the second double entendre meaning of unraveling. Gabriel Sherman article talking about how he hates everyone and in the White House, and he's unraveling. And one of the symptoms of that is the New York Times article where Bob Corker said he might be bringing on World War III, and also said that he castrated the power, metaphorically castrated his Secretary of State there. And here's Rex Tillerson, who's the one who supposedly called him a moron, not denying that. And Jake Tapper is very persistent on trying to get him to understand that by not denying it, he's kind of confirming it. And then also talking about the castration comment, which has kind of this, if I didn't have Saturday Night Live, this ends with what might have been my unintentional or maybe intentional political comedy of the week at the end of this. It's 5 minutes 40 seconds, but it's good journalism by Jake Tapper, and I'll discuss it with you after we watch it together over here.
The relationship that a Secretary of State has with the president is one of the most important relationships in the world. World leaders need to know that you speak for him and that he has faith in you and that you have faith in him. NBC News reported that you were frustrated with President Trump over the summer and you called him a moron during a meeting at the Pentagon. Now, you've dismissed the question as petty, but this is literally one of the most important relationships in the world, the one between you and President Trump. Is it true? Did you call him a moron?
Jake, as I indicated earlier, when I was asked about that, I'm not going to deal with that kind of petty stuff. I mean, this is a town that seems to relish gossip, rumor, innuendo, and they feed on it. They feed on one another in a very destructive way. I don't work that way. I don't deal that way, and I'm just not going to dignify the question. I call the president Mr. President. He and I have a very, very open, frank, and candid relationship. I see him often, speak to him nearly every day. I'm in the Oval Office a number of hours every week. We have a very open exchange of views on policy. At the end of the day, he makes decisions. I go out and do the best I can to execute those decisions successfully. And he understands at all times what we are trying to achieve to fully implement his foreign policy. He has assembled a very, I think, unconventional team. He himself is an unconventional president. He's assembled an unconventional cabinet. I'm an unconventional pick for Secretary of State. But that's because he does not accept the status quo with the many threats that we're confronting in the world today. And he is going to take forcing action. And oftentimes, the tweets or decisions he takes are intended to cause this forcing action to get off of the status quo, to force people to take action and move to a different place. So whether it's the decision on the Iranian agreement that was announced to force action to address this defective agreement, whether it's decisions on forcing North Korea to move to a different place of engagement, all of those are steps the president's taking to force action. He is not going to accept the status quo. The American people elected him to change the status quo, and that's what he's doing.
Ever since you called it petty, I've been thinking a lot about it because I'm a reflective guy and I understand the media makes mistakes and the media always could improve. But here's the thing. Either you didn't say it, in which case there are a whole bunch of administration officials telling the press and telling the president that you did, and that's a serious problem, or you did say it, and look, you're a serious guy. For you to say something like that suggests a real frustration with the commander-in-chief. So when you don't answer the question, it makes people think that you probably did say it. But either way, whatever happened, it is serious. So can you please clear it up?
As I said, Jake, I'm not playing. These are the games of Washington. These are the destructive games of this town. They're not helpful to anyone. And so my position on it is, I'm not playing. I'm not playing. You want to make a game out of it? I'm not playing.
I'm not making a game out of it. I mean, I'm just trying to seek clarity because saying that if I said that my boss was a moron, that would be a serious issue. It wouldn't be, and my boss doesn't control nukes. I'm willing to move on, but I just want to be clear. You still haven't denied that you called him a moron. And, you know, a lot of people are going to watch this and think he probably said it.
I'm not dignifying the question with an answer, Jake. And I'm a little surprised you want to spend so much time on it when there's so many important issues around the world to deal with.
I want to ask about Senator Bob Corker, who said something about you, and he was referring, he's a friend of yours. He has tremendous respect for you. He speaks highly of you all the time. He says that you're one of the best things about the cabinet, and he's dismayed. He thinks President Trump is constantly undermining you. This is a Republican chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He said that the president has, quote, castrated you before the world stage. That's his word, not mine. What's your response to that?
Well, as I indicated earlier, Jake, I think this is an unconventional president. He uses unconventional communication tools. He uses unconventional techniques to motivate change. And for people that have been around Washington a long time, this is a place that you know better than I. You've been here longer than I have. This is not a place that likes to change. It actually enjoys the status quo. The last thing anyone likes to do in this town is make a decision. Because when you make a decision, you're suddenly accountable for that decision.
True.
And so the president is out trying to motivate people to change, whether it's on health care, with his executive action he recently took to motivate that change, whether it's on executive orders around immigration to motivate that change, or whether it's under the action he took under the Iran deal on Friday. It's to motivate a change. People in this town get very nervous and get very uptight about having to address serious issues by making decisions. So the president is simply trying to do that in his very unique style, and he is very unique. I don't think there's any doubt that anyone sees him as anything other than the most unique president we've certainly ever seen in modern history, that we have recorded history of.
Hard to dispute that.
But again, I would say I am fully committed to his objectives. I agree with his objectives. I agree with what he's trying to do. How he wants to use his own skills tactically to push things toward change, I'm there to help him achieve those.
That's all. You have a cattle ranch. You don't want to say anything about the senator suggesting you've been gelded before the world. That's not anything that bothers you.
I checked. I'm fully intact.
I did not expect that answer. So let's turn to Russia, Senator.
That's what the Trump era has brought us, I guess. You know, after, you know, some people said that the size of my hands mean there might be some other problem, and I can tell you there's no problem in that area. We got to that. That was one of Trump's, that's a paraphrase of Trump in the campaign after Marco Rubio claimed that he had small hands and therefore might have problems somewhere else. And now we have the Secretary of State on one of the Big Five corporate outlet, you know, high-class Sunday morning news analysis shows, telling Jake Tapper of CNN's State of the Union that he checked and he still has his balls. Or, I don't know, is that what he said? It's pretty much what he said. Gelding, castration, I mean, let's be real, that's what they're talking about, right? Of course, it's all metaphorical. It's metaphorical. He metaphorically checked and he's metaphorically intact. Anyway, that was the one clip that was most worth watching about Trump unraveling, because Rex Tillerson, you know, he came out and did this weird news conference where he did not deny calling President Trump a moron. He said, you know, I'm not going to get into that petty stuff. And here he comes on a news show to sort of follow up that performance. He was on a couple news shows, and I think this is the only clip I took of Rex Tillerson. But he, again, it's another non-denial denial. And as Jake Tapper, even after Jake Tapper said, you know, most people are going to think that means you probably did call him a moron. And he just said, I'm not going to play those games. And then it's basically he's playing a game while saying he's not playing it. Is that diplomacy? Does that mean he's a good diplomat? Well, actually, Nikki Haley, who some say that's what they used to say on Fox News, but I've been reading in the media, you know, the fake news or the actual journalistic community, depending on how you look at it, that Nikki Haley may be the replacement for Rex Tillerson if he actually ends up going. And there's been a lot of, you know, common, you know, the common sense wisdom or whatever, that he can't survive with being castrated, and with Trump thinking he called him a moron and refusing to deny that his days are numbered. Well, Nikki Haley may be the next Secretary of State, and apparently she's been in a big feud with Rex Tillerson, but she also handles that very diplomatically. She denies it. She wants to avoid all the drama, but she really dodges all the questions, I think. She was on a couple different shows. I picked Meet the Press just because that's the first show she was on that I watched, and here she is denying that the feud between her and Rex Tillerson has gotten to World War III proportions, and also dealing with the castration quote in the 2-minute clip from Meet the Press this morning over here.
And the reporting on this was a story in Politico earlier this week that called you the president's Iran whisperer. And within that, there was a White House official that described some escalating tensions between yourself and the Secretary of State, and using the, quote, World War III proportions, describing tensions between yourself and the Secretary of State. What's your reaction to that comment?
That is just so much drama. I mean, it's all this palace intrigue. What I'll tell you is every member of the NSC works very hard to put options on the table for the president, and we all work very well together, and our goal is to always make sure we're keeping Americans safe. And so I am glad to be living in New York just for that reason, is that I don't want to be near the drama and I don't want to be near the gossip. I'm going to continue to do a good job, and so is every member of the NSC. Well,
I want to ask you another question on this front, having to do with something Senator Bob Corker said. He believes when it comes to what Secretary Tillerson, particularly what he's been trying to do with China, both on the North Korea front and on the trade front, he said this: us working with Beijing effectively is the key to not getting to a binary choice when it comes to North Korea. When you publicly castrate your Secretary of State, you take that off the table. Do you agree with Senator Corker's assessment here that the president has essentially undermined his Secretary of State when it comes to North Korea and China?
You know, I'm not going to get into the drama of the he said situation. What I will tell you is what I have witnessed is the President and Secretary Tillerson worked very well together. I've been in the room with them many times. They continue to work strongly together. The Secretary puts out as many options for the President as he can. He makes a decision. There's a mutual respect, and they go forward. And so everything that I have witnessed, all is fine. And if there's a problem...
Standing as the President. I want to ask you...
So like I said, very my analysis of that clip, and at that, I apologize to the live viewers who may be experiencing some streaming problems, but I guess I'll have to upload the recorded version. And actually it makes me think, having just finished the general topic of Trump unraveling, both in terms of unraveling Obama's legacy and then maybe personally unraveling and having like these meltdowns in his administration, I have 5 clips specifically on unraveling the Iran deal, and then 2 clips on unraveling Obamacare through this executive order. But maybe this is a good point for the Sandy fans out there. I hope some of my live viewers hung around after that stream problem. I do have a Sandy clip for you all. This is Sandy settling in for the show, lying down, and then I end with putting her head down, and it's about 14 seconds long. And then I will get to Iran and Obamacare. Here's the bonus Sandy clip for the Sandy fans. So that's your Sandy clip. Bonus Sandy clip for the Sandy fans. And I apologize to the live viewers for the stream errors. Now the 5 clips I want to show on the unraveling of the Iran deal, starting with, I think, the most nuanced, moderate Republican position on this. This is, of course, from one of the most moderate Republicans, Susan Collins of Maine, who recently decided not to run for governor in Maine, so she's going to stay and be a moderate force. And she was, of course, one of the votes that killed the repeal and replace attempt of Obamacare in the Senate, and I actually have a clip of her talking about Obamacare or Trump care or whatever you want to call what's happening now later when I have those last 2 clips. But first, here she is giving, I think, the most moderate Republican assessment that is in favor of decertifying the Iran deal but not pulling out of the Iran deal, to spotlight a couple issues. Although I disagree with her position, it's more moderate than what I'll show you a little later. But anyway, here's Susan Collins talking to George Stephanopoulos about her nuanced position supporting Trump's decertification of the Iran deal over here.
Finally, Ambassador Nikki Haley is up next to talk Iran. Do you support the president's decision to decertify the Iran deal?
It's important to distinguish between what the president did and what he didn't do. He could have reimposed sanctions unilaterally. He could have withdrawn from the agreement. He chose not to do that. Instead, he put a spotlight on 2 very troubling deficiencies in the agreement. Deficiencies which caused not only me, but also the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, to vote against the agreement. And those deficiencies include the fact that there are no limitations on Iran's ability to develop ballistic missiles, including an intercontinental ballistic missile, which could reach us. We need to remember that a nuclear weapon is not just the warhead, it's the means of delivery as well. And second, he outlined a very important point, and that is that under the agreement, Iran has what I call a patient pathway to developing a nuclear weapon. So we ought to try to fix that, and that's what I hope that Congress will do, and I hope that the president will consult more fully with our allies, since this is a multilateral, not a bilateral agreement.
Senator Collins, thanks for your time this morning.
So I think that the concerns that Susan Collins raises there are fairly moderate and, worth raising. It's just the tactic of decertifying. I don't really see how it actually helps in any way alleviate those concerns, which I'll get to after I show a few more clips. But I also want to show, remember earlier I told you to remember how the EU foreign minister said that the European allies were not in favor of what the Trump administration is doing. And Nikki Haley in this next clip addresses that, and her response is that, in Iran they chant death to America, and so we're the ones really threatened. And there's a big fallacy in that I'll talk about after I show the clip as a little cliffhanger, so I can save some analysis of the clip till afterwards. And one of the things is that about this clip that made me really want to show it to you is it starts with a clip of the days when we actually had, a rational, reasonable president, and just those few seconds at the beginning there, they made me a little wistful. You can tell me if the beginning of this clip makes you wistful, and then I'll talk about my analysis of what Nikki Haley says in terms of the European allies, why it doesn't make sense after we watch that clip together over here.
Consider what happens in a world without this deal. Without this deal, there is no scenario where the world joins us in sanctioning Iran until it completely dismantles its nuclear program. Nothing we know about the Iranian government suggests that it would simply capitulate under that kind of pressure. And the world would not support an effort to permanently sanction Iran into submission. Put simply, no deal means a greater chance of more war in the Middle East.
That was President Obama announcing the Iran deal back in July 2015. Let's talk about it now with the U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley. Thanks for joining us again this morning. In the wake of the president's decision to decertify, the German foreign minister yesterday said that he believes that decertifying the deal is going to put us closer on a path towards war, echoing President Obama's comments right there. How do you respond?
Well, I think, Iran's not right now saying death to Germany. They're saying death to America. And I think that you have to look at the fact that this is not talking about the deal. This is talking about U.S. law. And what U.S. law says is every 90 days you have to reevaluate and see if it's still doing and still proportionate from where it was supposed to be. And when you look at their support of terrorism, when you look at the ballistic missile testing, when you look at all that they're doing with arms sales and things like that, they are not proportionate to what the concessions that we gave them, and it's something that we can make better. And I think that's the focus.
Our European allies don't agree with what the president's done on Iran.
Our European allies need to remember they're not the ones the threats are coming to. And what they do agree is that Iran's in violation of all those things I mentioned. They absolutely agree. They also absolutely agree those things need to stop. And now you'll see us going forward talking about those things to bring Iran in compliance, not just of the deal, but of the international community and what's expected to be a good community citizen.
So there you saw Nikki Haley a couple times say that, they're not the ones threatened. The Europeans aren't the ones threatened because they're not chanting death to Germany. They're chanting death to America and Iran. But, of course, that's ridiculous because one of the things the United States is worried about is Iran's ICBM program, where they might develop missiles that can hit the United States. Well, Iran already has missiles that can hit Europe, most of Europe, and Europe is a lot closer than the United States, so Europe is actually as much under threat from terrorism and more under threat from missiles, which is why that argument's kind of stupid. And there's a little bit of that argument that you'll see H.R. McMaster deals with in this next clip. This is James Rosen doing a little bit of light questioning of the administration position on Iran. You'll see bringing up sort of a light version of the point I just made in terms of the allies about how they're not going to renegotiate this deal. And, what I showed from that, I told you to remember from that original clip about the EU foreign minister, James Rosen brings that up, but I don't think his criticism of the Iran, of course from Fox News, the criticism of the Iran deal is not that robust, and I'll juxtapose it with a real democratic defense of the Iran deal from the Obama administration and criticism of what Trump is doing from Senator Chris Murphy, and also on Fox News in just a minute. But here is the gentle questioning of the National Security Advisor for the Trump administration, H.R. McMaster, by James Rosen on the Iran deal. A little under 4 minutes long. I think actually doing a better job than you saw Nikki Haley do in that last clip. as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together here.
The men in government today, whom I think you most admire and respect, advised the president against making this decision.
Iran is not in material breach of the agreement, and I do believe the agreement to date has delayed the development of a nuclear capability by Iran.
I believe at this point in time, absent indications to the contrary, it is something the president should consider staying with.
And our allies have weighed in right about where you would have expected them to be, with Britain, France, and Germany issuing a joint statement, and I quote, "We stand committed to the JCPOA," that's the technical name of the Iran deal, "and its full implementation by all sides. Preserving the JCPOA is in our shared national security interest," unquote. So, General, isn't it farcical to imagine that the Iranians or the P5+1 allies are going to be willing to revisit the terms of this deal?
No, they already are revisiting the terms of the deal and the implementation of the deal. And our European allies, the E3 they're called, France, Germany, and the UK, are supporting much more rigorous enforcement of the JCPOA and monitoring. One of the real problems with this deal is we can't really say with confidence that they're complying. And we know from their behavior broadly in the region, and their behavior within the agreement, where they've walked up to the line, they've crossed the line several times in terms of the restrictions, that this is not a trustworthy regime. So much more comprehensive monitoring is in order.
What parts do you see the Iranians being willing to revisit?
Well, it's not even revisit, it's just implement the agreement by going to sites, to fully implement the inspections of sites, the monitoring of suspicious sites within Iran.
The things you find most objectionable about the deal, which is the restrictions on military sites for access for inspectors, the sunset clauses, the Iranians are not going to revisit any of that, are they, willingly?
Well, they have to revisit it, because otherwise what you do is you just give the Iranians the opportunity to develop a nuclear capability. Their programs can advance, and then they can go to industrial scale enrichment of uranium within a very short period of time, and then bridge into a weapon. And that is just an unacceptable risk to the world.
Isn't that precisely what they can do if you walk away from the deal?
Well, the president's not walking away from the deal yet. So if he sees some real change, if he sees the ability of the Congress within U.S. law to address some of these problems associated with the deal. So this, in our legislation, the domestic law about the deal was really flawed, because it was really just about us reporting to each other. So what the president has done is led with Congress to ask Congress, help fix this domestic legislation, and let's work on, as Secretary Tillerson has said, a deal that can lay alongside the JCPOA and address its fundamental flaws, one of which you've already mentioned, which is the sunset clause, where Iran can just wait for a little while, reap all the benefits of sanctions relief, to enrich the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is on a murderous, brutal campaign across the Middle East, and then bridge into a nuclear weapon.
Which was designated as part of this initiative, correct?
Yes, because I think what's really important about the president's speech is to pay attention to the whole speech, because what the president has done is he has laid out a strategy for dealing with Iran's destabilizing and dangerous, hate-filled behavior. Its behavior toward its own people, and its behavior to the region. And I would ask, as we always pay attention to our European allies and others, pay attention to our allies and partners in the region, what they've said, the people who are under the gun of this regime, Israel and Saudi Arabia in particular.
All right, let's turn.
So there were some good questions from James Rosen there. You know, I criticized him in the previous clip. This clip, like I said, there was some light questioning. I don't know. I mean, he did bring up the fact that Mattis and the defense people think that the United States should stay in the Iran deal. It's in our national security interest. And also the fact that the European allies aren't going to revisit the deal. So I have to give him credit for that at least. And I also think Mattis did a better, not Mattis, H.R. McMaster did a better job of explaining the Trump administration position on decertifying the Iran deal than Nikki Haley did, especially in terms of the European allies. Although I don't think it's going to work because, well, I'll get to that after. Well, actually, I think the best criticism of the Iran deal And I wanted to actually juxtapose this, like I said before I showed the last clip, with the last clip. This is why I called the James Rosen questioning light. This is James Rosen talking to Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, Democrat, about the Iran deal. And I think Chris Murphy does a better job of explaining what is so wrong with the Trump administration position, a better job than in any of the last clips that I showed on specifically on the Iran deal. And then James Rosen, I think, does a somewhat disingenuous and self-promoting follow-up question where he shows a clip of himself saying, you know, talking to the State Department at the time of the Iran deal, saying, you know, you can't rule out that this is going to help Iran. And a very short clip. It seems like it might be edited. I didn't have a chance to go and look at the full thing, but it's like a really short clip of the State Department official saying, we can't rule that out. But that's like, as a lawyer who did cross-examination, that's like, you can't, you know, is it possible that Iran will use this money to bolster their, you know, nefarious activities around the Middle East? Is it well, anything's possible. Can't rule it out 100%, but so I think this is using his own clip in a way that, in a question that I thought was kind of weakly phrased to make a real substantive point, is my real criticism of this clip. But I thought Chris Murphy does a good job of criticizing what Trump has done in Iran over here.
So, firstly, what did you make of the remarks you just heard from General McMaster?
Well, you were right to point out that there's not a single advisor around the president that advised him to decertify the Iran deal. The fact of the matter is, Iran is complying with the agreement. The White House is required to tell Congress if they are not, and they have submitted absolutely no submissions. There is no chance that the deal is going to be renegotiated. The Iranians will not renegotiate it, and neither will the Europeans. And so if we were to pull out of this agreement, as the president is threatening, Iran would get everything they want. They would be able to restart their nuclear program because we would be in violation of the deal. The Europeans would continue to grant them sanctions relief. Their economy would continue to grow, and they would look like the victim in this situation. So there is absolutely nothing that accrues to our national security benefit if we ultimately pull out of this deal, and it is an absolute fantasy to suggest that we are going to be able to restart negotiations.
Still, even the Obama administration conceded a year ago that the nuclear deal, far from having a salutary effect on Iran's regional behavior, might actually have been emboldening it.
You can't rule out that, in fact, this deal has served as a cause for this more aggressive posture.
I mean, I can't rule that out.
So wasn't it high time, Senator, that the nuclear deal, specifically the threat of abrogating it, be used to try to curb Iran's more aggressive regional behavior?
So importantly, those of us that supported the Iran deal did so with the knowledge that we could continue to pass additional sanctions to stop their other nefarious activity in the region. And we did that. Earlier this year, Republicans and Democrats joined together to pass new sanctions against Iran's ballistic missile program. But you know what? The president hasn't implemented those sanctions. So the White House can't complain that Iran is still acting in a deleterious manner in the region and then not implement the powers that we have given him to try to stop that behavior. We should be working together to take on their support for terrorism, their ballistic missile program, their miserable human rights record. But if you allow them to get back on a path to a nuclear weapon, their activity in the region supporting our enemies, it's even worse. It's even more threatening to us if they become a nuclear power in that region. That should be unacceptable, and that's what that deal was about.
You heard the president's.
So like I said, I thought that was a really good explanation of why what Trump is doing makes no sense, especially because you saw H.R. McMaster and Nikki Haley say that they were, and even Susan Collins justify this as a way to stop what you just saw Chris Murphy there say, that the European allies aren't going to revisit this, and that this is just gonna, I mean, the idea that it's going to embolden them. Also, I really think that was a self-serving follow-up question from James Rosen, where, like I said before I showed the clip, all he showed was him in a very closely edited clip getting someone from the State Department refusing to rule out it would embolden the Iranian nefarious activities. And anyway, like I said, I thought Chris Murphy did a really good job there, much better than any of the Republicans, and I think he pretty much refuted what I showed in those previous clips. But I want to show one more clip, and I think for this clip I will save my analysis, except to say this is the Israeli Prime Minister criticizing the Iran deal and trying to defend what Trump is doing. And John Dickerson asks him some good questions, but you'll see by the end of the clip, he doesn't point out that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has actually totally contradicted himself within this 2.5-minute clip. And I will explain how Bibi Netanyahu contradicted himself after we watch that 2.5-minute clip together. Over here.
To those, including the signatories to this agreement, who say that Iran has been abiding by the agreement, and that while 10 years is a deadline you picked, that in fact there are longer deadlines where Iran will be monitored, and if they break and try to move back to a nuclear capability, the entire world will see and jump on them right away.
John, I've always said that the greatest danger of this deal is not that Iran will violate it, but that Iran will keep it. Because under the deal, in a few years' time, Iran is guaranteed to have as many as 100 nuclear bombs. That's folly. And kicking the can down the road is not wise policy. So whether or not they keep it or violate it is not the point. The point is they have a highway right now to, assuming they keep the deal, to get to that point where they become a terrorist rogue regime with a vast nuclear arsenal. So that really has to be stopped. And I don't think the issue right now is whether they keep it or whether they violate it. The issue right now is we've got to change the destination to which they're heading.
The supporters of the deal obviously dispute your characterization of their ability to get those bombs. But let me ask you about this scenario, which is what if Iran looks at what President Trump has done and says, OK, no deal, we're going to go back to the full sprint to a nuclear program and blame the U.S. president for breaking the agreement?
Well, they could have done that right from the start. They could have rushed to the bomb. You know, they never wanted to do that because there's always been a combination of the threat of a credible military response, which, by the way, we put forward. We didn't need others to put it forward. And equally, crippling sanctions. Remember, I stood in the UN a few years ago and I drew that red line? That's before the deal. They didn't cross it because they knew what the stakes are. And Iran today knows that if they do what you just said, they're going to get crippling sanctions on their heads. The U.S. alone can do that. The U.S. is, you know, it's a very powerful economy. It's almost a $20 trillion economy. The Iranian economy is 2% of that. So you think when countries have to choose between the U.S. economy and the Iranian economy, what will they choose? That's a no-brainer. So Iran faces crippling sanctions by the U.S. alone, let alone the U.S. with its allies. I think they're going to think twice.
All right, Mr. Prime Minister, thanks so much for being with us.
And no follow-up from John Dickerson. I don't know, maybe it was out of time, but as I was pointing out before I showed the clip, there's a total contradiction. At the beginning, he says if they stay in the deal, they have this highway to get a bomb. But then what if they pull out of the deal? Can't they sprint to a bomb? Well, Netanyahu says, well, they could always sprint to a bomb, but they would never do that because we have the military option and we could put crippling sanctions on them. Well, of course, both those options will also exist after the 10-year, you know, the sunset provisions that have the Republicans and Bibi Netanyahu all upset. So why is it that the crippling sanctions and the military option are going to stop Iran from sprinting to the bomb before the agreement, or if they pull out of the agreement, but not after 10 years of the agreement when they are frozen in place and then they have the possible opportunity to sprint to a bomb, but then the united worldwide community could put sanctions on them, not just the United States. And of course there's still that military option, and of course there are all these inspectors in Iran based, you know, from the deal, so that the United States and the other signatories have a much better chance of understanding whether there actually is a sprint to the bomb in Iran. So anyway, that's why I think BB totally contradicted himself, and John Dickerson didn't point it out. Was it because he ran out of time, or just because he didn't see the contradiction? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And like I said, I have 2 more clips. The last topic is the unraveling of Obamacare through executive order. But before I get to that last topic, I've noticed I did have a couple super chat contributions along the way that I wanted to acknowledge. My YouTube monetization has gone up just a little bit. Last week I thought I wouldn't get monetized at all. My video last week about gun control immediately got demonetized. It only got about 5,000 views, and about the first 4,000 were demonetized. Some other videos, it's not as bad as it was, but it's still pretty bad. So I appreciate these 2 super chat contributions. From Sexy Bob and Kevin Berry there, and Sexy Bob suggesting that I try to set the same start time every week. To try to get some regularity is why I do this Sunday show every Sunday. That's about the best regularity I can come up with, and I've been doing it for over 4 years now, but I rush to finish the show every week, and sometimes I have family commitments and other, to do something every Sunday as almost a hobby. Sometimes there's a little bit of revenue involved, but it's a hobby slash, I don't know, like part-time job, part-time business. I don't know. If you saw the revenues involved, you would think, why are you giving up every Sunday for 4 years plus in a row? And so the variability of the start time depends on how long it takes me to do the show, and also sometimes other commitments I have on Sundays. Occasionally I even have to go over to Monday, but I do the best I can. It's just a one-man operation. I'm doing it all myself, so it takes as long as it takes for me to finish, and then as I've explained often, it's usually about 8 to 10 hours every Sunday, which is why I hope to eke out some revenue from it, although I actually enjoy doing it, or I wouldn't do it. So, but I appreciate the input and suggestion, and of course the super chat contributions from Sexy Bob and from Kevin there. And now I want to get to my last 2 clips on the rolling back of Obamacare. These are the first one is Jake Tapper talking to Susan Collins, and these are both Republicans. This is kind of demonstrative of the problem that Republicans and the Trump administration have on repeal and replace. This is a Republican versus Republican split. Susan Collins, as I mentioned earlier, was one of the big no votes that stopped repeal and replace, and she's very critical of what the Trump administration did, stopping these subsidy payments to insurance companies to subsidize them for the co-pays and some other part. Well, you'll hear it kind of described here, and you saw it described pretty clearly in that ABC clip I showed earlier. Here's Susan Collins as a Republican saying this is going to hurt vulnerable people, talking to Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union this morning over here.
Trump followed through on a long-discussed threat this week, ending the cost-sharing subsidies to health insurance companies. The president hailed the move as a way to stop a Democratic, quote, windfall to insurance companies, but President Trump's former chief strategist framed it as a move to destroy Obamacare.
Then you had Obamacare, not going to make the CSR payments, going to blow that thing up, going to blow those exchanges up, right?
Joining me now is a Republican lawmaker who has voted to block all of the recent Republican efforts to overhaul Obamacare, Senator Susan Collins of Maine. Senator, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jake.
So let's begin right there. By scrapping these subsidies to health insurance companies, is President Trump, as Steve Bannon said, blowing up Obamacare?
Jake, the debate in Washington has been on whether or not to repeal and replace Obamacare in the future. What the president is doing is affecting the ability of vulnerable people to receive health care right now. This is not a bailout of the insurers. What this money is used for is to help low-income people afford their deductibles and their copays so that their health care is available to them. In addition, the president has taken steps to cut off funding to reach people who are eligible for subsidies under the ACA. So these certainly are very disruptive moves that will result in smaller numbers of people being insured, that will make it more difficult for low-income people to afford their out-of-pocket costs, and that will destabilize the insurance markets.
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, Senator, but you're saying that President Trump is taking actions that will hurt American citizens.
I do believe that. I'm very concerned about what the impact is going to be for people who make under 250% of the federal poverty level, because the funding that is available under the cost-sharing reductions is used to subsidize their out-of-pocket costs. And if they can't afford their deductible, then their insurance is pretty much useless.
Let's turn to the Iran deal, another part of the Obama.
So there you have it from a moderate Republican. I can't really criticize that too much, because I agree pretty much with everything Susan Collins said. Criticizing what Trump did, stopping these insurance subsidies, are going to hurt vulnerable people, are going to hurt people within like 250% of the poverty level. I mean, it's basically, as Steve Bannon kind of admitted, which Jake Tapper used in the premise of his question, that it's an attempt to blow up Obamacare, not to like take the American people hostage, trying to get Democrats in Congress to do something. And the like fig leaf I've been hearing on Fox News all the time is, well, these payments are unconstitutional. And, you know, I got my Constitution here, and there's nothing in here about the law that orders money to be paid, that somehow is unconstitutional. But there is sort of an issue in this, which I will discuss after I show the final clip for the night. This is, I wanted to juxtapose this with the reasonable arguments of Susan Collins in that last clip. This is Bill Cassidy, who got in a fight with Jimmy Kimmel, you may remember, because Jimmy Kimmel pointed out his Cassidy Graham bill that was going to be the last repeal and replace attempt would hurt so many people and not pass the Jimmy Kimmel test that would, you know, allow people who have a baby born with some sort of genetic abnormality or congenital defect would still allow them to have insurance that wouldn't have life. This is Bill Cassidy trying it being unconstitutional. Fox News has been using this argument about unconstitutionality so many times, and I will explain why it's bogus, or at least contested, after I show the Bill Cassidy clip for the final clip tonight over here.
All right, Senator, support the president. Leveraging the president against the very health care decision that he made this week. Let's listen.
We got to continue to think about that family around the kitchen table who cannot afford their premiums under the Affordable Care Act as it now is. So we do not wish to do anything. We don't want to make it worse for them. Now, the short-term continuation of the CSR payments, if we will, cost sharing reduction, would be a part of that.
So, Senator, do you still believe today, as you did just 2 months ago, that termination of these payments is going to make things worse for that family around the kitchen table?
For first, as I said, they're unconstitutional. If you had played a little bit more of that clip, you would have heard me say that I think Congress should pass that short-term extension. And that's actually what the president is asking. The payments are unconstitutional according to a court. And his first responsibility is to uphold that. But we absolutely have to think about that family around the kitchen table, which is why I think Congress should pass them. Republicans have been trying to do so, but coupled with flexibility so that premiums can come down. Keep in mind, with those payments, that family's paying $30,000 to $40,000 a year. We've got to do something to lower their premiums. And so, if we continue them on the short term, have the regulatory flexibility to lower those costs, and then do something like Graham Cassidy to correct things long term, I think that's a good direction.
But again, in the absence of the congressional action that you advise, the president now ordering the federal government to stop payments for these reimbursements, is that going to help or hurt that family around the table? Yes or no?
If you take the totality of what the president did, I think it actually helps the family. So those who are lowest income, the payments will still, the subsidies will still go to insurance companies for them to buy their coverage. And someone told me that CBO says they may actually pay a little bit less. If you speak about that family who's just above federal poverty level, according to eHealth.com, a family of 3 making $82,000 a year, according to the Affordable Care Act definition, cannot afford their current policy on the exchange. They're making $82,000 a year, and so $30,000 to $40,000 is beyond their reach. The president also allowed flexibility for their employer to perhaps band together an association health plans, or for short-term insurance to be sold that would be much lower in cost to allow them to purchase that which they can afford. Right now they can't afford. Let's give them the chance to buy something they can afford.
Senator, some remarks made yesterday at the Values Voters Summit here in Washington.
And so you see James Rosen there, like, moving to a new topic without any cross-examination about the unconstitutionality of these insurance payments. And several times in the panel discussion later on Fox News Sunday, they claimed there were various people claiming it was unconstitutional. No one ever explained how it might actually be constitutional. And it's based on this one district court decision. And it's because Obamacare was poorly drafted. So it ordered the president to make these payments. It ordered the executive branch to make these payments, but it didn't actually appropriate the money. So Congress has to appropriate the money every year to do what Congress already passed a law. The Obamacare law orders the executive branch to make the payments, but doesn't appropriate the money. And then the Republicans, when they took over Congress, refused to appropriate the money. So it's a conflict, but that doesn't mean it's unconstitutional. There are various ways this can be resolved. There's actually a federal claims court that has this whole fund of money that's meant to pay claims where the federal, money that hasn't been appropriated but that the federal government owes. So there are various different ways this money could get paid. So it's really disingenuous to claim that it's unconstitutional. So I just wanted to make that analysis, but that's the last clip, and I apologize to the live viewers for all the stream errors. And so I'll be uploading the recorded version of this program for the recorded viewers, and hopefully it won't get demonetized by YouTube, and I can make some money from ad revenue. I appreciate, I saw Skelly Crew gave me a super chat contribution along the way there too, so I appreciate that. I appreciate the people who just show up and keep me company and give me live comments along the way, for those who watch the recorded show and comment on the show and give me supportive comments and appreciate my work. I also appreciate that. And of course, my monthly patrons on Patreon, that's like the monthly income that is the largest income I get for my work now. I put a link down in the video description where you can become a monthly patron. I've asked for people who have never done that and want to give like a $1 or $5 contribution just for 1 month and then cancel after a month. I noticed some people did that. They did it for a month and canceled. So if a few more people could do that, I'd appreciate that. That helps me keep going every week, and I will be back next week and every week for the foreseeable future with my Liberal Viewer Sunday live clip roundup. I hope you appreciate the clips I picked out, my commentary that I've added, and I appreciate all of the commentary you've given me along the way. And I guess until next week, I will be seeing all of you around the internet.